I'm going to introduce my first guest. Eric, if you can start sharing your screen. Eric and I met at a blockchain conference. Neither of us do blockchain, but we both knew that we had to start thinking about what does higher ed really need to do. And I met Eric, and his passion for higher ed comes through from the discussion. So I've asked all my guests, so including Eric, to say, don't worry about the presentation, bring your passion. So Eric, supports a company called PathwayU, and he is supporting 123 schools. Did I get that number right, Eric? 123 schools. He comes from the business side of the world, but he's passionate about higher ed. He's passionate about helping institutions change. It is about the passions that we will have, that we want our students to have. For you guys that don't know me, I have a daughter who's 17, a son who is 13. When they come out of college, the jobs that they will take on does not exist. My daughter is applying to colleges. She asked me what majors to take. I asked her to say, think about the passions you want to study, that you want to learn. And I am actually going to be, I am going to be talking about those type of passions. So Eric is a passion guy. His company talks about passion. So I'm going to let Eric talk about that passion that he has, what his company does, but it's really about the strategy. It's not his company. It's about the strategy that they believe and why they decided to go there. So Eric, without any further long-winded discussion by Matt Alex, go ahead and take the stage.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Matt. And thanks everybody for attending today. I'm honored to be here. Just a quick check. Matt, you can see my screen, yes? Okay, good. Good. Well, as Matt said, I'm Eric Leftwich, and I'm here today to talk to you about reaching and recruiting your ideal student. When you go through the summit today, there's going to be a lot of dialogue about, birth to death conception of a learner. And I'm honored to be here to kind of talk about a business perspective of the challenges that we know schools are dealing with in terms of recruiting students. And so in our agenda today, I'm just going to hit some highlights of the market. I look at the business of education probably offensively, but very different than a lot of consultants that work with education. I came from the business development world. I came from the economic world of products and customers. And so when I stepped into the field of education many years ago, 8 years ago, I love the idea that we have a product, which is the educational world. And so the features within that product are the experiences and the things that we've developed within that educational process. So you'll hear me today talk a lot about the institution as a product or as a service. And I don't mean to be offensive by that, but it just sort of equates itself nicely in my business development brain. And then on the other hand of that, I think about students, the learner. And yeah, that's the user of the product, but sometimes the customer is not just the learner, but it's a supporting member like moms and dads, or a foundation that's paying a scholarship, or even an employer that's sending that student into the system. And you'll hear me talk about the customer. And that's what I mean when I say customer and product. So I know that might be offensive. Hopefully we didn't have a bunch of people drop off the meeting, and I'll hit you with what I'm going to talk about. We'll talk about the market. We'll talk about customer personas, and we'll talk about a new way of thinking about pitching our product or talking to our customers in sort of an enterprise sales approach. And we'll use acronyms like TAM and LTV. We'll talk about the innovation quotient that all businesses have to deal with. And then hopefully at the end of my conversation, it's provocative enough that you guys move forward and talk collectively about some of the things that I brought up today. Some of you may vehemently disagree with me, and I think that's a great conversation. I totally support Matt's vision. It's not really about products or services. It's about the dialogue that we're all going to have together and being able to change our industry. So let's first talk about the market, right? So any business development guy always has to know who his customer is, and that's the market. Do we have a product that fits the market? Of course we do. Since time immemorial, education has been important. But if I have career counselors on the phone today, I don't have to say anything about the shrinking market, right? COVID hit, and what I think COVID did is it accelerated some of the potholes that Matt had just talked about in his introduction forward. Like we knew on this journey of recruiting students and putting better outcomes through the educational process that we had some hurdles coming down the pike, and then COVID hit. And I think those hurdles hit us a little faster. But one of those hurdles, even before COVID, was the idea that baby boomers had children, my age, I'm 55, and then the children had children. And so what's happened is the census of the number of college bound students is decreasing year over year. Not only is that census decreasing, but then there's a vast competition for those census points. And so the marketplace is changing. You know, never ever before in our history has information been so readily available. Every person has a supercomputer in their pocket. I could look up how to do a regression analysis if I needed to, and then not have to remember my business training. But the concept of the marketplace is changing puts more pressure on the customer and us being able to get the customer. So when we talk about the perfect client, the perfect customer, reaching the ideal student, I want you to think about that ideal student a little differently. There might have been a day when we talked a lot about ACT scores, their GPA, their economic background, whether or not they have a legacy member. And then we might have used that as a demographic to think about who we have to go after. But I would say at my level, at the business concept, I would tell every president, every provost that your ideal learner is the learner that engaged with your university knowing that it was the right fit for them. They didn't melt away from the point where they said they were accepted within your university and the day they started. And then when they engaged, they stayed engaged through all 4 years, so they retained. And then ultimately, that ideal learner is also that learner that graduated, found an employer perfectly in alignment with their education, and espoused the value and the beauty of their educational process. Sadly, when we interview students, you know, working with 100 universities and all the lives of the students that we work with, there's a lot of things that get said. And unfortunately, the alumni of a lot of universities will say things like, I don't even use my degree. And that hurts me. And so for those learners that have that experience, they might be telling people, you don't need to go to university. You could do a 2-year program. You could do a digital badge. You could go to Galvanize, take a coding course and make 200 grand a year. And so the stress on the marketplace exists because there are emerging suppliers. When we look at the supply and demand curves of Keynesian economics, we've lived in the world of equilibrium for a while. Didn't have to worry about enrollment, but now suddenly the supply chain is increased, the demand is sort of changing, and we have to keep pace with it. You know, this comes right out of Hobson. So when we talk about the market demands are different, 10 years ago, if I'd ever called an institution a product, they probably would have kicked me out of that institution's speaking engagement. And if I ever said that a student was a customer, they'd blink their eyes at me. But now we know that the demand in the marketplace, being much different, is sort of shifting towards a return on investment and the value of that education, because information is so readily available and the access to education is much more in ways that we never thought would really be here at this time in our life. And so Hobson's actually reports, and I love this, like I remember that my son, who's now 27, he was getting a lot of brochures, and the brochures were beautiful. It's the fall leaves falling on the campus oval, and you know, he could envision his life on campus, and he wanted to know what the dorms look like and all of that. And now students are thinking more and more about what is the return on investment and how are you going to help me after graduation find jobs? And that is a real hard thing for a lot of universities to make that shift. You know, education, the hallowed halls of education are about knowledge and experience and building leaders and character. It wasn't about jobs. But unfortunately, because the marketplace has changed, the market consumer has changed, and the product demands are different, we're going to have to do something a little different to move forward. And moving forward is understanding our core customer. So what's interesting is, okay, Eric, I agree with you. The number of students that we can bring in might be reducing. Maybe I agree with you, maybe I don't. But the one thing we do know, all of us, is that the nature of the student, that persona of the student is definitely evolving. World of work is changing. Jobs are going away. More older adults are entering into the workplace. Businesses are paying for students to go to college as a benefit of employment. Foundations are getting more scholarship money because of CARES Act dollars, and they're paying for students to go to college. When we look at the students, the face of diversity is great. And we spend a lot of time talking about diversity and inclusion on campuses, which is really, really important. But we don't spend enough time about thinking about that inclusion and diversity in our dialogue with students that we want to recruit. So you really, truly have to know your client to really get a handle on your total addressable market. And then understanding that student, okay, maybe it's no longer a 16, 17, 18-year-old. Maybe it's the 30-year-old that's worked in a manufacturing sector and lost his job and now has to reskill. Knowing that demographic of who you want to go after because your product supports it becomes way more critical than ever. And the access to those people is really going to change in the next coming years. I think college recruitment and your people that actually sell the university are going to rely more on traditional business lead generation tools. So those could be things like the deep analytics that we could get from Google or Facebook, maybe the algorithmic behavioral studies that say, okay, students that do these things in their social media profile, these are the people you want to add to or present an ad to, but you're going to need to know how to talk to them. And then when you talk to them, you're going to need to be very intimate with them, because these new consumers, they want to know that you intimately know who they are. And that's because they want to hear the value, the return on investment of their education through their entire education through career life cycle. So knowing the student is not only diversity, but it's also even kind of understanding where they've come from. Millions of students, even before the pandemic, had already experienced the online training program or online classes. They're actually deluged every day with ads about, those classes that you can get, the master classes, become a chef online. And they are seeing all these new marketplaces for ways to get education. They're testing it because some of these people offer free things, free experiential learning platforms, and get into this platform, see what it's like. So most of the students that we're going to be reaching out to in the next 5 to 10 years are already familiar with online learning. Everybody makes a big deal about the shift of online learning. For K-12, that's a big deal. But for us in post-secondary market, in any way, whether it's a 2-year program, trade school, all the way through grad school, no big deal. In fact, it's a way to reach into other places. Talk about diversity. I can tell you, we worked with a avionics educational entity. They teach airfield operations. And they were worried that their census was going down and down. We had some meetings with them. We talked to them a year later. 70% of their population were Chinese students that were provided finances from the Chinese government because the Chinese industry knew that they didn't have enough pilots. So their customer persona completely changed. Now they're thinking about what other countries need to fill gaps in the workforce, and how can we recruit that country to send us students into our world. So I don't say that as a solution to your recruiting problem. I say that as the idea to truly understand that the nature of your customer, the nature of the person that's going to enroll in your university is backed by the need for ROI and the need for a fit to a career. One thing that I've always loved is when business writers right from the perspective of the corporate world as it relates to education. And Horn and Moesta wrote an article in Harvard Business Review last year, and it was a big article, and it was called The Job of Education, or The Doings of Education. It was something interesting, but it was the title that caught my eye: Do colleges truly understand what students want for them? And the three things that they said really have resonated with me over the years. One, let's take a student in that first, second year, and let's help them map their purpose and their passion, which is a real shaker, right? There's a lot of universities that still exist out there that are pick a major, pick a major, pick a major. A lot of that is moving away, and now universities are thinking about, no, we need to map that student to our majors with more scientific information, like machine learning or assessments. And that's great too, but they might be missing the idea of an employment factor. The second thing was, it's got to be risk-free and very easy to do. So if students are looking for digital badges and programs that don't require a four-year degree, universities that are ahead of that and that are thinking about offering those things within the four-year curriculum, they're the ones that are going to be further ahead, because that de-risks the idea of the investment. And then finally, the third point that he made in the article, which I really love, was creating pathways that have a clear sense of compass to an ultimate destination, which is basically a joyful, purposeful, meaningful, and sustainable life. Because why would I spend any time in the education market or the education world, or spend my dollars to learn anything, if it wasn't going to make me better? So when we look at what's next for most businesses faced with problems like we are today in the education world, you don't have to be a MBA to think about the concept of innovation or dying. Every business needs to innovate or die. But I would say for our industry, the economic equation for the education industry is that our future is really balanced on this fulcrum of the world of work. So employment needs certain things from students at different times in their life cycle. And can universities meet that need so that throughout the course of the 4 years, we're checking a student in and out of the employment sector? So there's some interesting dialogue about that, and I know you guys are going to be talking about it. The other thing, in the terms of marketing it marketing our product to our customers, we have to think about the why we exist as a business and how it provides that ROI. And then we have to build features and things within the element of the education process that support that why. So you don't have to be a genius to know, and you'll laugh when you read this, but everybody makes buying decisions based in these three elements. So if your university isn't saying things like, coming to our university, we will give you credit for your life experiences to defuse some of the burden of time and tuition, you're going to have a problem. If you're not saying, if you come to our university, we are connected to the private sector, and we're going to be able to help you think about not only a vocational pathway, but get connected to employers, so that when you're done here with us at any level, you're going to get a job. And then finally, if you have those traits, you have those abilities, you have to position it in the marketplace to show that you're competitive. And so the marketing department within every education sector might want to beat me up when I say, look, it's still the 4 Ps, right? We have to talk about our university in a way that it's a product, and we have to put that product knowledge in the channel of where people buy it. So those 4 Ps are really, really important. But when we talk about placement and or promotion, now the demographic of student might be a little different. But ultimately, the one thing that we know in business, and Simon Sinek hit it so long ago, was the concept of the why. Universities have a problem with that, mainly because the brochure is beautiful. It's about who we are. Who we are as a university. Look at our buildings, look at our campus, look at our curriculum, look at our majors, look at our class sizes. But they don't talk enough in their marketing about the why we exist. And so, Simon Sinek said it best. It's right on the slide. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And it's because the equation hits them personally in the ROI. So when we talk to that student, we say that our educational process exists because ultimately you need a destination. And we're going to help you get to that destination, whether it's a 2-year, 4-year digital badge, graduate destination. We don't care. Come here. We'll help you get there. And so the concept of mapping to a why is really critical in the form of marketing, which is kind of a different thing in the field of education.
Eric, just about a 1 minute.
Thank you. I'm wrapping up. So as we get to the call to action, I want you to consider these 4 things, right? I've shared with you more than any time in history, we know it in our hearts that education is really leaning more towards helping students find outcome of employment, right? We know that the future might actually include a hybrid model where employers are in the classroom, employers are on the campus, and we can check a chemist who's getting a major in chemistry into a role to get an experiential learning perspective on how to solve the COVID virus and then get back into studying the chemistry that they need to get it done, right? And so I'm gonna leave you with closing thoughts, and I'm gonna take 1 minute to say this. 2019, we were summoned to the White House. No matter what your politics are, when the White House calls, you'll go. And we were steps away from the Oval Office talking to people that you see on TV. And they were saying, reskill America, reskill America. And I said, 70% of the American population hates their job. So when they get a job after they've spent so much money on their education, they don't stay in that job, they bounce. The employer says those are bad graduates. The school says we give them the best education, and the consumer reflects on the whole process badly. So what if we thought about connecting that learner first to purpose? And then if we map that purpose to a vocational pathway, first, second year, not a major, and then we connected the resources that we have at the university to that destination, wouldn't that drive much, much bigger outcomes? So I thank you for your time today. If you have any questions or would like to connect with me in any way, there's my contact information. But Matt, thank you for the time that you gave me, and everyone, thank you for the time you spent listening to my talk today. I really appreciate you all.
Eric, hang on, because we're going to just dialogue a little bit. There's a couple questions in the chat that I think is really important. First of all, thank you for doing the talk. I think it's a great time. And Jason, you're up next, so I'm going to come to you in a second. But you talk about passion and what we do. Like, I never feel like I'm going to work, right? Well, I think that's the same thing for a university and a child or a student going through a community college or a university. Is like, how do they feel like, this is the passion of what I want to learn? Because part of higher ed is teaching people how to interact and how to learn and how to absorb and how to process. Everyone thinks it's going to be a 16-week course and you're going to get a job and move. The reality of it is universities prepare students and colleges prepare students to interact with different type of people. Preeti asks the question, we're now focusing on personas, these different type of people. How do we connect, our curriculum to those personas? How does a university start to look at personas in the way that they design their curriculum? If you can answer that question, that'd be really, really good.
Yeah, and I'll do it not from a product perspective because, Matt and I are of the belief that there are a ton of really wonderful products that are out there that do analytics and assessments and provide some insights into who that student is. And then there's psychometric equations and algorithms to kind of predict. I'm a purveyor of one of those products, but I would say first it's a paradigm shift. I would love for all the universities to get on the same page that it's not mapping a student to a major, it's mapping them to a vocational pathway. And the intimacy of getting to know that student could actually just be down in the trenches. It's crazy to say, but I think admissions and career counseling and student success need to be the triad that's developed to make sure that we're recruiting that ideal student. So if we're bringing that student into a dialogue about career trajectory in the future, got their moms and dads, their employer, the foundation, the people paying for that education, everybody's going to feel good about it. And then when we have that dialogue with that learner, the minute that learner finds a sense of purpose or passion or calling, our study has shown they get a higher GPA. When they hit that hard course like thermodynamics, they can actually realize that they've got to push through it because they see that there's a destination on the end, engineering of bridges, not just being an engineer. And they can kind of push through it. Or when they hit that hard course, they don't just drop out, they look at what other lanes are in the concept of engineering that wouldn't require that course by vocation and not by major.